everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of our new editorial webinar series, Coffee Talk. Each hour-long information-packed episode, curated by our editors, features the insights and observations of an independent expert on a wide range of tech industry topics. Many thanks to the underwriting sponsor of this episode, full-stack cloud directory platform provider JumpCloud. Without their support, this series would not be possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief in the Converge 360 group of 1105 Media, publisher of the enormously popular Redmond magazine, among many other tech trade tomes, and I'll be your moderator. Today's topic is remote workforce security and best practices, and our main speaker is Mr. Howard M. Cohen. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. This episode is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way in the next few days. We'll make our time during the talk for some questions. We'll make some time during the talk for some questions. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsor, JumpCloud, has provided some extra resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Be sure to check those out. And as a small thank you to all the attendees who stick with us to the end, we'll be sending you a $5 gift certificate to Starbucks. It's a cup of joe to go with the info. Now let's meet our main speaker, technologist, content creator, and senior resultant, Howard M. Cohen. In his 35 years in the IT industry, Howard has held senior executive positions in many of the top channel partner organizations, and he currently writes for and about IT and the IT channel. Howard is a sought-after speaker and insightful observer of the technology landscape and one of our very favorite presenters. Take it away, Howard.
Well, thank you, John, and hello, everybody. I'm Howard M. Cohen. I am a creator of compelling content who spent 40 years in the channel. In the last 13 years, I have been writing for and about the channel, and today we're here to talk about remote workforce security and best practices. The remote workforce, of course, is front of mind with all of us. I mentioned to John earlier this morning that it seems like the big quit keeps getting bigger, with more and more people demanding that they be allowed to work from home, at least part-time. For those of you who have been at my presentations before, you know that I like to start every session with a word. I'm big on words. Today's word is anachronism. And no, I'm not talking about you, John. Relax. I'm talking about things like the rotary phone, right? If you show, ever wonder about people who say, oh, dial the phone? Most people don't know what you're talking about anymore. They never saw a phone with a dial on it. Of course, some of us have, and it's an anachronism. It's no longer current. Similarly, when we talk about turning things clockwise or counterclockwise, or as the Europeans like to say, anti-clockwise, a lot of people don't know what we're talking about because clocks are digital. Who has a face on a clock anymore? So there are a lot of anachronisms. The one I'd like to talk about today is the anachronism going to work, or what will soon be the anachronism going to work. Instead, we're going to be talking about getting to work without going to work, because you don't have to go anywhere. With that, I'd like to introduce this gentleman who said to us, work has become an activity, not a place. It's something we do, not somewhere we go. And by the way, he is Robert Frankenberg, who was the chairman of Novell Corporation, which, if you think about it, is yet another anachronism now. He replaced the original chairman, and actually, Mr. Frankenberg said this to us in 1994, 28 years ago. 28 years ago, it sounded like a great thing, except it didn't really catch on. There were some telecommuting initiatives that came and went, but people really didn't want their people working from home. They wanted them working in the office until a major occurrence. And of course, that major occurrence was the outbreak of a global pandemic, COVID-19. This global pandemic occasioned a global digital transformation along with it. As a matter of fact, given that we sent millions of workers home in a day, it was really an instant global transformation, global digital transformation. We didn't have any time to think about it. Everybody just went home, and we all kind of figured out what to do after that. Fortunately, of course, 26 years prior at that point, in March of 2020, we were prepared. Bob Frankenberg had told us this is coming, and here we were, and it was happening. People were working from home and trying to continue working without being slowed down. There's a certain group of companies that were really very relieved when this happened, and breathed a sigh of relief because they had already completed their transition to cloud computing. They basically found it easy because everything was in the cloud. Their people could connect to the cloud just as well from home as they could from the office. And so they were able to adapt to this new working from home standard very quickly. And of course, in the cloud, everyone is equal. Everybody has the same basic access. It's the same speed. It's the same efficiency. It's consistent amongst everybody, and everybody feels good about it. So let's just examine quickly the biggest changes that took place during that period when everybody was going home to work. And this is really much more germane to IT managers and security managers, and it has to do with your threat surface. Before the pandemic, your threat surface was basically your building, your area where you worked. And you scanned that area, you looked for problems happening in that area, and you prevented them from creating outages or breaches or exploits or what have you. And by and large, that was manageable. Then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, your threat surface changed. Now, it was not just citywide, it could be statewide, it could be huge, because every employee's home was now suddenly part of your threat surface. You had to worry about what was threatening all these little parcels of land all over the place. You didn't even know where some of them were, but they were your responsibility to protect. Let's take a look at the dynamics of how that worked out. So here's our building. And in our building, we had a local area network. Everybody worked on the network. Everybody was happy. Some people here and there did work from home. And what they did was they used remote access software to connect to the company's local area network. Pretty simple. Worked fairly well. Nothing to worry about. Then even the company LAN got connected to the cloud. Soon that changed over to more of a remote access software, and everybody was communicating with each other through the cloud. The cloud became the mode of transport for everybody, for everything. This created somewhat of a problem. Our original threat surface was just our own building, and that was easy enough to manage. Not easy, but viable. Now we also had to worry about the threat surface around our employees' home. And it wasn't just that one employee, it was all of our employees. That could be hundreds of people, hundreds of homes, thousands of homes, and they were all up to us to protect. So how do you do that? Well, you can't exactly go to hundreds or thousands of homes and install a firewall in every one. I suppose you physically could do it, but then you'd have to manage all of them. How do you manage hundreds or thousands of hardware devices in hundreds or thousands of homes all over the place? That was difficult. So this gave rise to Secure Access Service Edge, SASE. And SASE basically brought together the software and the standards needed to operate the network with the software and the standards needed to operate security. It kind of treated them as one. And so you had all of these different capabilities all built into this one platform that was centrally located, centrally managed, and distributed. So it could cover all of those homes, all of those little chunks of threat surface. Some of the components, software-defined wide area networking. In an environment that's that changeable, with people's homes coming on and off the network all the time, it had to be software-defined. Otherwise, you couldn't possibly have the agility to keep control over all of it. It needed to use zero trust. Zero trust network access, very simply, goes beyond President Reagan's adage, trust but verify. Remember that? Now it's never trust and always verify. And literally, zero trust means that every device, every entity on the network has to constantly be verifying itself and proving that it is who it says that it is. This was necessary when you had so many, far-flung areas to protect. Identity and access management became critical. The use of cloud access security brokers made it easier to centrally manage and distribute that kind of protection amongst all your users wherever they might be. Firewall as a service, same thing. Centrally managed, but available to protect each and every location, each and every user. Now remember, those users were out there using who knows what. Maybe their kid's computer, a home computer. Maybe your company issued them a computer. It was a toss-up. And another thing that became critical was multi-factor authentication, combining something you know, your password, with something you have, in this case, your mobile phone, which received a 6-digit code that you added along with your password. And having the two would allow you access to your network. Okay, so SASE revolutionized the way in which we provide security, especially in the context of all of these remote users. Secure web gateways. You're going to be probably driving everybody through a central point of contact. You want to make sure that nobody suddenly pulls who knows what kind of content into your network through their web browser. Big focus on identity management, big focus on network access control. Why do I repeat both? It's important to recognize that it's not enough just to authenticate the user. You must also make sure that you authorize and approve the device. Does the device that they're using to access your network have sufficient security capabilities? Is it sufficiently configured to operate on your network? If it's not, it could open up a gateway that would allow bad actors to get in there and access your data and your network. So, while we're talking about it, the most vulnerable point on anybody's network, of course, is an endpoint. Actually, all the endpoints. It's easier to break through a smartphone or a laptop than it is to get into the core of the network and get directly at the servers. So you had to protect the most vulnerable network segment, which isn't only those endpoint devices, but many will tell you that it's the users who are very vulnerable because users are not digital devices. They're not perfect. They can make mistakes. They can work inconsistently. So you needed to protect both with identity and access management, multi-factor authentication, network access control, which allowed you to interrogate the devices to make sure they were okay. And many managers used role-based access control to keep all of this under manageable control. That is to say that, imagine that you had to make a change for some users, maybe a lot of users. Can you imagine sitting there and making that change one by one by one, user by user by user? It could take days, weeks. With role-based access control, everybody becomes part of a group. Some may be in the operations group, some may be in the finance group, others in the marketing group. When a change is necessary, you make the change to the group. and everybody gets that change. Everybody in that group gets that change. Makes it much more manageable, much more viable to make those changes quickly enough to have meaning. Okay, so we've looked at the network. We've looked at the endpoints. Now, let's look at the most important part of the operation, breakfast. No, not breakfast. Data. I use the bacon slide because everybody says that data is the new bacon. Everybody loves bacon, and everybody loves their data. Their data is their most valuable asset. And literally everything we do in IT is about the data. It's the data that we're moving. It's the data that we're massaging. It's the data that we're storing. So it's all about the data. And the first thing that can be said about the data is that it has to be encrypted. It has to be encrypted. And I'm not talking about just when you're sending it from place to place. When data is at rest in any storage device, bad actors can get in there. They can penetrate. And if your data is in there, they can either steal it, or they can corrupt it, or they can encrypt it. So we've got to encrypt it before they do. We have to encrypt our data so they can't get at it at all. And of course, when the data is in transit from place to place, it's no surprise to anybody, we have to encrypt it. So the only time, and this makes a lot of sense, the only time it's not encrypted is when you're using it. Okay, you decrypt it, you use it, and then you re-encrypt it and put it into storage. That is critical for managing data. The other thing to think about is whose data. Okay, depending on whatever device the user may be using, you still have to worry about the data. If they're using their own smartphone or tablet, they have their personal data on it. Photos of the kids, people's phone numbers, banking information, what have you. When they start to use it for work, they're going to be keeping corporate business data on it as well. You must create some kind of firewall between the two. They must be segmented from each other. And so you may indeed segment the storage in the machine, in whatever device it is. Then they can't use their personal email or personal messaging to communicate your corporate data to their friends. Can't happen. Another strategy that people use a lot is the VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, where no data gets to the device. The device just displays the results that are being achieved by a processor back at the data center. That's very, very safe, and it's a very, very popular way to do it. But no matter what you do, you have to keep the two separate. Same is true for the accounts that they're using, the internet accounts that they're using, the network accounts that they're using, and the devices themselves. You know, whose device is it? Do they own it? Well, if they own it and you decide it has to be bricked where all the data gets erased from it because it's been lost, you're going to be erasing their personal data along with your corporate data. That can leave you liable. So you've really got to be very careful in the way you determine that you're going to handle data. You have to make sure you establish and enforce a strong policy about data, accounts, and devices that are going to be on your network. And while we're on the subject of policy, let's talk about it. This is where it all begins. And I'm sorry that I didn't start the presentation with this, but really everything begins at policy. There needs to be a policy for everything that's going to happen, and especially when people are far-flung and not at the office where you can basically bark at them, you have to make sure that they know and understand and appreciate the policies that they're operating under. These policies include an acceptable use policy. Not for nothing, but your email system is yours. And you have to state that to your users, otherwise they can say nobody told them. If they send out nasty emails to people, you can actually be liable for that if you haven't told them that that's not acceptable. And they haven't acknowledged that that's not acceptable. So be sure you do that. Another policy is identity and access. We talked about how to manage it, but that management is there to enforce your policy. If you don't have a policy, then all of that technology isn't really going to help you much. You know, who's allowed on the network? What devices are allowed on the network? What does the configuration have to be? So forth and so on. Of course, we kept on talking about the data. The sensitivity and the criticality of your data has to be established in policy. Which data can be used for what by whom? And so very important to make sure that that's in published policy. Another very important published policy is data backup and retention. Public rules of common usage are based on your retention policy. That is to say that if you say you're going to keep your data, your email data, for example, for 1 year, if a federal agency wants to go look at your data, your email data, and anything that's more than a year old is still there, okay, but if it's less than a year old, if the stuff that's less than a year old is gone, you're liable for that. Who decided it was a year? You did. You can set it for 6 months. You can set it for 10 years. Doesn't matter where you set it. You have to abide by what you set. So be conscious of that when you're establishing your policy. Proper incident response, again, for those of you who are subject to government regulations especially, when somebody does exploit your network, when you are breached, you need to report that to certain agencies. It's a very clear set policy based on the agency. Any agency you are liable to, you need to make sure you know where to report any inconsistencies, any exploits at all, any breaches of your security. If you do not report and it's identified, you're liable for fines and penalties. And that's not something you want to involve yourself with. So be sure you understand up front what the proper incident response is, especially when you have people working all over the place. They're not going to know what the incident response policy is. You need to know it, and you need to be sure you're monitoring to become aware of anything that happens at anybody's station. And then the disaster recovery and business continuity policy. This has changed radically. In the old days, disaster recovery policy should include who's the fire marshal on each floor of your building. Where does everybody go if there's a disaster in the building? Now they're not in the building. They're at home, a lot of them. What do they have to do? Where can they go to gain access to the network if they can't get it from home? How do they take advantage of a failover? Most cloud providers have multiple data centers. Your data will be failed over to automatically in the event that one of their data centers gets into trouble. That's great, but most managers don't want to depend upon that. They want belt and suspenders. So you need to establish your redundancy as well so that you are insulated from anybody else's disaster. This has to be defined in your policy and executed in reality. What we've just talked about is security, right? There's also compliance, and I emphasize it that way because compliance and security are not the same thing. They're not equal to each other. As a matter of fact, you can be as secure as possible, but still not be compliant with all the regulations you're responsible for. You can similarly be fully compliant with regulations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your network is now secure. One does not equal the other. So you need two separate teams. You need two separate initiatives, one focused on security and the other focused on compliance. And when we talk about compliance, remember there are 3 levels of compliance. You need to comply with your software agreements. Every time you start using a piece of software, you're agreeing to an end user license agreement, a EULA. You need to comply with that, or your software developer can sue you for misuse of their software. And if you think it doesn't happen, be informed you're wrong. It happens all the time. It's just not publicized a whole lot. Similarly, you have to be compliant with your own company policy. We just talked about all the policies you need to develop in your company. People have to follow them, and you have to enforce them to make sure that they do. And then, of course, there are government regulations, which if your business is liable to them, you need to comply with. And that has its own host of activities that you need to execute on. I'm not going to go deeply into all the different ways that your compliance can be compromised or your security can be compromised, but I do want to make a special stop at the most popular, the most prevalent form of compromise that we're experiencing out there, and that is ransomware. Ransomware, of course, starts with phishing attacks. A phishing attack is simply an email that shows up that looks genuine. It looks like it comes from your bank or your attorney or some very, very official organization that you work with. User receives it. It asks them to either click a link or open an attachment or do something. And when they do, they open the doors to all kinds of malfeasance. And people start coming into the network and doing all kinds of awful things. To get a sense of the scope of the problem, almost 60% of enterprises were hit last year with a ransomware attack. More than half of the companies in the world were hit with a ransomware attack. That's enormous. And 3/4 of the attacks that took place at all resulted in data being encrypted and held for ransom. So that's a lot. That's an enormous presence of ransomware. And of course, ransomware, since it attacks with an email, is a human engineering attack. It's attacking the most vulnerable part of your network, the user, because again, the user is not digital. The user is fallible. They can make mistakes. They cannot see that an email is fake. And quite frankly, even digital devices have a hard time identifying those that are fake. So if that's the case, if people have a hard time with it, even software designed to protect you has a hard time with it, what is your best way of protecting against ransomware? And the answer very simply is data backup. This is how seriously you need to take data backup. It has to happen every day. It has to fire off properly every time. You have to confirm it every time. Why? The idea behind ransomware is that they encrypt your data, and then they hold that data for ransom. If you pay the ransom, they'll give you the decryption key so you can get your data back. If you have a good, clean backup of your data available, you can simply restore that backup, get rid of the affected data and replace it with good data, shore up your defenses against that attacker coming back in again, and never have to pay that fine, never have to pay that ransom. A lot of people have held themselves harmless from ransomware attacks by having an available backup that they could restore very quickly and get back to work. So take backup that seriously. And whatever your backup strategy is, make sure that it also backs up all of your users, which suggests that all of your users' data really should be in the cloud where you keep all of your other data. And all of it should be backed up, and all of it should be protected by hardened devices and software. Okay, so we've looked at the network. We've looked at the endpoints. We've looked at the data. We've looked at all of these components of people working remotely and even at the office. Let's now look at the part that I keep on saying is not perfect, and that is the people, the users. It's very important that you manage the users very closely, especially when they're working from home, not because they're going to goof off, not because they're going to be lazy and not work. Many managers think that is the case. As a matter of fact, the reason that the original telecommuting initiatives didn't work was because of managers. Okay, what took so long? Managers felt that the farmer's shadow is the best fertilizer. It's a very famous old farmer saying. The farmer's shadow, if it's cast on the field will be productive. the crops will grow. And my reaction to that is hogwash, another farm reference. Hogwash, it's just nonsense. You do not need to cast your shadow upon your employees to be able to manage them effectively. People can be managed in other ways. People are by and large more trustworthy than that. Of course, if you want to make sure that they are working, and actually if you want to learn more about their work than you ever have before, simply implement workflow automation. Use workflow automation across your network, and every employee can signal the beginning of a task and the end of a task, every task. Now suddenly you can see how long things take. You can see if that's getting smaller and smaller to getting faster and faster as they do things over and over and over again. You can see who amongst the team is most productive, who's doing it fastest. There's all kinds of things you can learn from data that you could never really learn from direct observation of your employees. So take advantage of the availability of workflow automation, and you'll find that remote management is in many ways superior, not inferior, superior to direct management. Workflow automation is just part of the picture. People need to be able to communicate with each other. And what we're finding is that they're much happier messaging than they ever were calling. The number of texts going across the telephone network far exceeds the number of phone calls being made on it, and that's been true for a few years now. So, don't look at texting as something kids do. Texting is something everybody does. And you really need to consider implementing a text management system so that you can retain all of the text going back and forth for e-discovery later on if you need to, but also for reference by the users themselves so they can go back and look at their conversations and extract necessary information from them. The more you support messaging, it's not just simple message and SMS, it's also Facebook Messenger, LinkedIn Messenger. There's plenty of different kinds of messaging platforms available, including those that are managed by you yourself. These messaging platforms are part of larger collaboration platforms that bring them all together. You can text, you can call, you can see each other on video. You can do many different things. Most recently, a great new addition has been simultaneous editing. You can work on documents together, even though you may be miles and miles apart, across continents even. Basically, everybody opens up the same document. They all see it. They can all see where other people on the team are working on it. They can work on their portion of it, and it all gets saved. So you can have a committee of multiple people creating a document which accelerates the production of documents immeasurably. It's incredibly faster. The same thing can be done with document approval. There's no reason you can't have approvals being done in parallel rather than passing from person to person to person, which can take weeks. Another consideration in collaboration is the ability to see each other, a very personal consideration. It's very important, and this is really what happened instantly after everybody went home. They all jumped on group meetings like this one. They also had group parties, people celebrating things. That was nice too. The trick in doing that, of course, is getting used to video. And this is an argument many people have. It's not easy to get used to video. The fact of the matter is that we've had plenty of time in which to do that. As a matter of fact, at last count, we had 56 years to do that. This photograph was taken at the 1964-65 World's Fair in Flushing Meadow Park in New York. And before you ask, yes, I was there. And I actually got to see the picture phone from AT&T and try it out, and it was amazing. And years later, when video finally became commonplace, I couldn't stop thinking about how amazing that was so long ago. So what's the trick? How do we do it now? We start with Unified Communications as a Service, UCAS. UCAS basically connects everybody, allows you to text, allows you to phone, allows you to see each other, whiteboard with each other, simultaneously, and it enables all of those capabilities and more. And it can be used one-on-one. So here you see two people having a conversation one-on-one using video, using a UCAS application. The trick is the willing suspension of disbelief. Let the glass disappear. Forget that it's there. After a while, you feel like, yeah, I'm talking to a person. And it doesn't seem all that different from talking to them in person. You realize sometimes that you're becoming better and better at reading paralinguistics. Paralinguistics are the ways in which we communicate that are not verbal. They're not just the things you say. Some are gestures that you make. Some are posture, like if you cross your arms in front of yourself. Others are facial expressions, which say a lot. Motion of your eyes when you roll your eyes or look up to the left or look up to the right. All of these things say things to the person you're communicating with. And if you learn to read them better, you can get much more out of the conversation, not just across the glass, but in person as well. The only thing we're waiting for that we can't accomplish that way is smell-o-vision. So you can have a very robust conversation with somebody across video. Make it personal. Make it informal. Have a coffee meeting. Have a coffee talk. A coffee talk. What a great idea for a series. Have a coffee call. This young lady has a coffee cup sitting right there on the left side of her desk, and I'm sure the gentleman does as well. Keep it light. Don't make it a formal issue. It's not like you're talking to somebody in space. Houston, we have a problem. Nothing like that. Another advantage of using video is the idea that you can record the conversations. Why is this a good idea? Because you can now use artificial intelligence engines to transcribe those recordings, meaning that in about 15 minutes after the meeting ends, you can get a complete written out transcript of the conversation. You'll notice that this young woman is not taking notes. She doesn't have a notepad in front of her. She doesn't need to. She'll take the transcript, she'll highlight the things that are important to her, and she'll have notes forever without having to distract herself and show the person on the other end the top of her head. This is an amazing advantage, and if you haven't tried it, please do. It's easy to get access to, easy to use, and incredibly changes the way you work. There's also Ucas Conferences, right? And that was the first thing that everybody did. Well, look at this photograph of this young woman participating in a video conference. What's wrong with this picture? I'll tell you in a minute. One of the most important things to do when having a conference like this is to establish etiquette. How do you indicate that you want to speak next? How do you stop speaking? How do you keep the conversation flowing without talking over each other? One of the most interesting, sad video meetings like this that I've attended was actually a video funeral because we couldn't all get to the city where the deceased had just passed away. They created a video funeral, and we all participated. The clergy that was officiating at the funeral was appointed as the host, and he called on people to give their eulogy for the departed. I have to say it was one of the most functional, one of the most efficient meetings I've ever been to, and it was really quite touching. It was a very personal experience. So it is possible to have personal experiences on a video call. It becomes less personal and colder when you turn your camera off. And that's what's wrong with this picture. When I asked at the beginning, everybody has their camera on. That's very unusual these days. People say, that, oh, I don't look very good right now, or they're being very vain about it. It's rude. What you want to do is behave as if you were in a physical conference room, all together in the same place, because you want it to feel that way for everybody. You want everybody to be comfortable in this meeting. Also, I recommend strongly that you have a headset ready in case you start to echo. You can plug in the headset. That usually cancels the echo. And have an alternative device. All too often, even in one of these presentations, my main device actually went out, and I was able to continue presenting using my smartphone, which was amazing and very, very helpful. You'll notice that this young woman has her mobile phone on the far right-hand side of her desk, so she's ready if the computer should have a failure. Of course, that working environment is very important. So people are going to be working from home. They're going to be working in a home office. Here, very quickly, because we're running out of time, is how to equip your home office. Number one, make sure there's a roomy work surface, nice big table, plenty of room for the person to work. Make sure you have a comfortable chair, but not too comfortable. You don't want people falling asleep while they're working. A task chair, good lumbar support, so forth and so on, so that they don't get a bad back from it, but still comfortable and viable for day-long use. You want them to have good lighting so they don't risk eye strain. You want them to have a fully configured computer, not just a home computer that the kids usually use for games. You want them to have some kind of phone. It doesn't have to be a hard phone instrument. I am talking to you right now using a soft phone that is using the same internet connection as my web browser is. Very efficient, very easy. I can just tap out the number on the screen and off we go. They need to have internet access, obviously, if you're using the internet as the transport. They may want to have a printer, although these days more people are doing screen reading and printers are becoming more passé in more environments. But the very most important thing is right here at the back, and that is they need a door. Right? If you're working in an open space, you are prey for all the different kinds of distractions that can happen at home. Statistics tell us that there are more distractions in the office. That's great, but if you can get behind a closed door in an enclosed room to work when you're at home, you'll cut down even more on the distractions there. And so I strongly recommend that the room that you use have a door. Finally, I just want to talk directly to managers. We're talking about having your people work from home. Well, that means that it's never been more important and it's never been more difficult to manage that person, that employee, as a whole person. Not just managing the work that they do, but managing who they are, managing their family issues. People get impacted by family issues, health issues. During COVID, many people lost relatives. It's very difficult to deal with. Many people got sick. Their health issues, very difficult to deal with. They have emotional issues. People are people. And the best way to manage people is to manage the whole person and help that person, support that person every way that you can. My strongest recommendation is to see your company as a community. It's a community of people. They may not all be together in the same place right now, but they all are reachable. They all are connectable. And be proactive about it. Make sure that you take the effort to keep in touch with everybody, keep everybody enfranchised and part of the company. And that will increase the benefit you enjoy from having people work at home, because make no mistake, there are real opportunities and real advantages to be gained by management in having folks work from home. With that, John, are there any questions?
Hey, Howard. Gosh, that was great. We only have time for a quick question. Let me look here. Are there any of these that you in particular, how about this one? There seem to be a lot of Ucas vendors out there. How do you choose the right one? Not so much a recommendation for a specific vendor, but the means of finding that vendor.
Right. I was going to say that I'm not allowed to recommend a specific one in presentations. But I will say that the thing that I look for, first and foremost, is manageability. You're going to be managing a system that's being used by people all over the place. You're not going to be able to just visit their desk if it's a problem. You need to have incredible control over availability. If somebody leaves the company, you want to make sure you can get them off the network very quickly so that they don't do something that might hurt the company. If they need more bandwidth, if they need more of anything, you want to make sure that's available. The other thing that I suggest you look for, quite frankly, is the ability to interface that platform with other platforms, with other software. If you can connect your software, integrate your software, your CRM is a great example. If you can integrate your CRM into your UCAS, then that makes it very easy for you to do all kinds of things that you couldn't do otherwise. There are plenty of other examples, but the first page that I tend to look at when I'm looking at a UCAS vendor is their integrations page. It's almost a sure bet that they all have a quality service, especially the ones that are most publicly known. But you want to have something that's flexible, agile, that has good APIs so you can connect your own software on a custom basis. Integration, to me, is one of the strongest features of any great UCAS platform. And by the way, with people working from home now and the inability to get out to customers, many companies are looking at building a contact center and having people communicate from there. Any UCAS platform that also offers a CCAS platform is absolutely advisable. And by the way, be here next week for the summit because we will be talking about how to build and secure a contact center.